Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Our session is on philanthropy in India today. And we have three distinguished speakers to talk to us about this. Philanthropy is a very age-old, or charity, if you wish, is a very age-old Indian tradition. The Bhagavad Gita, for example, has a line where it says that those who have surplus but who do not give to the needy when they are in surplus are no better than thieves. And we, of course, in modern times, the Tata Trusts, Jamshedji Tata was a contemporary of Andrew Carnegie, Joseph Rowntree, all of whom were in many ways the forerunners of modern corporate charity and philanthropy in the Anglophone world, at least. And today, of course, we have one of the world's largest universes of non-governmental organizations. Indians are, despite a relatively low income, among the highest givers of percentage of people in terms of give to charity or to donations. 84% of Indians, which means a lot of very poor Indians, give at least once a year. Even though only 30% give to registered charities, but it is a reminder that the vast bulk, if you wish, of charity, at least in terms of the people involved, are to the religious foundations and other organizations, which are not necessarily part of our normal universe of philanthropy. But the tradition is very strong. Both family businesses, large corporations, religious groups, and then even family, intra-family donations are extraordinarily common and taken almost for granted, I would argue, among all Indians. To speak to us both about what they see as what modern Indian philanthropy is about, and on their personal experiences. I have three speakers. Sundar Mahalingam, head CSO at HCL and at the Shiv Nadar Foundation. Preeyam Budhia from the Patton Group, and Sushil Premchand, MD of PRS, who's out right now presently in Switzerland. So maybe I'll first turn to Sundar and ask him to give his views.
Good evening. Thank you. In terms of, this is a very interesting topic, and as you know, he set the ball rolling in terms of philanthropy being quite in a sense, at least a well-established practice in the country. And but my feeling is that it actually came of age a few years ago. There are lots of first-generation entrepreneurs who took advantage of technology and telecom, etc. Those areas. So, and many of them were first-generation entrepreneurs, and many of them, I think, became what I call successful because of education and other things that really helped them. So, with that in view, I think many of them felt that they should give back to society. So, I think that's been a nice trend to my mind over the last. From the 90s onwards, that people have started thinking about giving back, and lots of people have, to my mind, earlier lots of philanthropy was there, but much more private, I would say, more maybe to temples, maybe to organizations of their own, what I call setting up. But now, in the last 20 years, lots and lots of people have started giving. And as Pramit mentioned, it's 85% of people have given at least once a year. So that's a very good trend in a sense. And add to that, if that is philanthropy, about 5 odd years ago, the government of India looked at corporate social responsibility, CSR, and sort of mandated that large organizations should give 2% of their net profit to CSR, charitable works or socially relevant works. So that was, I think, almost a game changer in a sense, because one, of course, lots of funds were coming in from the philanthropists, both old and the younger ones, but also you had now a sustained set of funds that are reaching the people. And India does need a lot of philanthropic help and a lot of CSR help, if you were. Lots of issues that I think we still need to work towards. So that's been a good trend. And if I were to think about the right time now, it's about, let's say, 6-7 years after the CSR bill was passed. I mean, there have been many changes since, but essentially 2% of net profits is the key point, and that's a significant quantum of funds that is reaching the Indian populace, right? So the good part is now the fund is there, funds are coming in, and from the perspective of the NGO community or the people who need these funds, I think there's now an alternate source of funds. So that's the good aspect. My thinking, and this is something that I think about, is that there's still room for what I call being more standardized and more process oriented in a sense, because when you talk about corporates and people who have to give funds, the CSR law, many of them are business drivers, so they are used to taking funds and looking at funds as does it create impact? What are the measurable goals? What are what I call the key metrics that define a successful, how does one say, investment in a sense, right? So, which was not something to my mind that the general NGO community or the receiving community has been used to. I mean, yes, to some extent, some of the larger NGOs, yes, but if you talk about the rank and file of NGOs, many of maybe are not used to this aspect. So this is the time, to my mind, is growing and evolving, where there's much more need for governance in this space. When I say governance, I mean from a perspective of how do you ensure that the funds that are being given are being used well, and there is a certain amount of impact measurement that happens. And that is, given that companies think like this, so that really helps a company in that sense. To my mind, the companies also have helped in the process of letting some of these organizations do this, but there's still a distance to go, in terms of how this can happen. And I think many organizations are working at that. So that's the one thing. So there is now more funds. It's a great thing to do. There are, as it's sort of mandated, it's the use of these funds are something that people are looking at quite strongly, and it can only help. How are these funds? I think the biggest challenge right now is thinking of how best can these funds be used to ensure that overall there is development for the country, for the key goals that we need to aim towards, and sort of bring it all together. So that's something that we should look at going forward. So, Pramit, if I could hand back to you, I think that's probably what I just wanted to say in my opening.
Thank you. One of the things, though, at some point, maybe with some of you could touch on later, as you mentioned, governance is a big issue. It helps corporations definitely in being able to target correctly, but it also raises compliance costs. And if you incorporate that with existing various government regulations and a whole host of other fronts on philanthropy, it may question how much money is actually being diverted into administrative issues and compliance. But before I turn to that, Preeyam, I'd like to turn to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be at this illustrious event, and it's my first time at Horasis, and share this digital stage with such a distinguished panel. Thank you for the lovely welcome. In my view, philanthropy in any form is really a vehicle of social change. As corporations, it is our duty to chauffeur change in by not only taking philanthropy from point A to point B, but also to newer, greater, reimagined heights. And the why behind philanthropy is key, coupled with long-lasting impact. And I believe that true transformation is only possible through a continuous increasing level of awareness at the macro and the micro level. And to that end, I'm happy to share a story about my philanthropic journey. It all began on a sunny afternoon. The first time I saw Geeta, or rather Geeta found me, I was 6 years old and doing something I had been explicitly told not to do. Climbing a tree in the backyard. I was lunging for the higher branch of the mango tree, and instead of shooing me down, she helped me up. And of course, immediately my new nanny proceeded to become my new best friend. After high school, I moved abroad to pursue educational and professional opportunities. After 7 years in the UK, I returned for good to join Patton Group, our over 4-decade-old family business, which manufactures water storage solutions as part of one of its many verticals. The first person I went to visit was Geeta at the village, where she had retired. We were having a wonderful time catching up when her daughter-in-law hesitantly walked in to say that they were running late to go collect water. Seeing the confused look on my face, Geeta explained that her rural village had no piped water, and hence the women needed to go to the tube well at the other end of the village. This took at least 4 hours each day. As I saw Geeta, her daughter-in-law and 2 granddaughters who had to skip school for this, gather an assortment of buckets, paint buckets, and jerry cans to set out on this quest for water, I got misty-eyed. Ever the firm but lovable nanny, kind of like an Indian Mary Poppins, she handed me a bright yellow jerry can and asked me to make myself useful. Moved by Geeta and her village's inability to easily access potable water, my team at Patton Group and I committed ourselves to finding a sustainable solution for transporting and storing clean, safe, hygienic drinking water. The solution was water on wheels, an ergonomic 90-liter roller tank with a tight-fitting lid and a handle. So how did our unique solution help? It improved water hygiene, it reduced the risk of neck and spinal injuries, it reduced the gender barriers by increasing the number of men helping with water retrieval, it saved time. Earlier, they walked nearly 365 days a year to fetch water. Now, it's approximately only 72 days. This has empowered several women to take up vocational courses and start micro businesses. The attendance at rural schools, especially that of female students, has increased. So my path to empowering rural women and children via sustainability projects has been paved with CSR based on the social entrepreneurship model. CSR, according to me, augments, amplifies, and complements philanthropy, and it is both a modern and appropriate mechanism of corporate giving. It fundamentally redefines giving, not making it synonymous with financial charity, and focuses on harnessing and deploying time, resources, and effort, not just money, for greater good. And I also feel it concentrates on being charitable over giving charity. And it gives back twofold, not only helping the demographic in need, but also all stakeholders across the value chain, right from investors, employees to consumers, which boosts the overall economy. CSR helps magnify the impact of philanthropy. Because of CSR, I could help not just my Geeta, but many more. If this had been a personal project limited by my own funds or at the mercy of donations, it would not have been able to change the lives of millions. Legally mandated CSR in India is just the starting point. Organizations can either pay lip service to it by doing the bare minimum and donating the stipulated amount, or delve deep and ingrain CSR into their core values. The changing face of philanthropy is promoting long-term CSR to transform gatekeepers of wealth to creators of wealth. It's time to view individual philanthropy and a growing culture of CSR as the intersection of positive impact. It's time to create a sustainable triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, fueled by passion, purpose, and perseverance. It's time to look beyond sympathy, beyond empathy, and build a culture of compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. One of the things what you showed, of course, is that you began your philanthropic actions well before the 2015 law was passed. And I think this is an interesting question, is that if tomorrow the government were to repeal that law, how much of corporate India would continue philanthropic charitable activity simply because they recognize that it has a broader good, not only for their own company, for their employees, but for society as a whole. But before that, we'll turn to Sushil, who is speaking to us on behalf of people.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Preeyam on a very eloquent summary of her journey, but also on the whole approach that they've taken at Patton to provide these ways of moving water, which is, for all the reasons that you mentioned, the start of an interesting journey. And I think that your comment on the triple line really echoes very well with a lot of what's being said today. So my congratulations, and thank you for the comments. Let me start with two definitions. The first of philanthropy from the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the desire to promote the welfare of others, especially through the donation of money to good causes. In Fowler's etymology, there's a complementary comment, which is philanthropy is the benevolence towards mankind. This is a historical definition of the term of philanthropy. The legal definition of corporate social responsibility we've addressed already it's not really relevant to my mind, but I just want to make the point that there's a difference between philanthropy and CSR, and the requirements of the companies and organizations that work in that area have to respect the need to help the environment and the people and the organizations in very many different ways, such as Preeyam and Sundar have explained. For me, the classic comment was made by a very well-known journalist, Sir Stanley Reed, who was the editor of the Times of India from 1907 to 1923. And his comment was, "When I think of Bombay, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, I like to recall not only the beautiful city itself, but the men who made it." This is the introduction to a film on the Merchant Princes of Bombay made by Zafar Hai, where some of us were involved, who really believed in philanthropy. And these people, these four men, really believed in philanthropy and giving back to the city from which they had made their money. And I believe that is a difference to CSR, because it is CSR being a legal requirement. These people had no legal requirement, and they just did what they thought was right. And they gave their profits from their business activities back to the people. So it is a reflection of family values that is philanthropy. The legal requirements in CSR are not necessarily determined by family values. And that's one of the points that I think is very important. I'll talk a little later about some of my experiences in philanthropy, but the point really is that I've been imbued with the whole concept of philanthropy that our family has been involved in different ways from my childhood onwards. Today, my concern is there's an over-reliance on CSR, its regulations and its rules. That conflicts with the notion of modernizing Indian philanthropy, which was rooted, as we've said before, in tradition. I still believe there's a deep tradition in the concepts of philanthropy, not just in India, but everywhere. In the Catholic Church, for example, tithing is a normal process. In Judaism, people are expected to give back to society, often at the level of 10%. And I think today a societal change is taking place where many people reflect much more on themselves than on the world around them. I'm of the opinion that philanthropy is something that has got forgotten at times, and that CSR is used as a cop-out by some. I'm not trying to undervalue the importance of CSR. It does provide a consistent stream of 2% of profitability. There are different rules that describe how much has to be given, but that's for major corporations. It doesn't really apply to smaller companies such as ours. And I believe the total amount of the CSR pool is, I think, $2 billion. It's a huge amount of money that's now ended up in that CSR pool. And that's much more than ever was there before. And that's very important to help people. But it's a means of supporting the poor. But Frank's initial commentary was that, should we be viewing the poor as customers? I don't think that's right. We have to look at the mutual environmental and overall societal benefits of CSR. The focus does need review, and that's been partly done through the legislative changes that we've had. We have to figure out in our minds that giving back to society is different to helping the poor and those in need. There's an essential
Sushil, you're on mute. You may want to.
When did you last hear me? About a minute ago? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'll carry on. The point I made about education is that there is important to have education, especially for the girl child. And my great-grandfather was involved in that exercise going a long time back. But you have to find a balance between the spirit of giving and the legal requirements. We have to encourage both. But let's not forget that there's a moral requirement, as I see it in the concept of philanthropy, and a legal requirement under CSR, and you have to fuse the two in some manner. It makes it easier to give corporate funds, but people who are involved in corporate environments could easily and give substantial amounts of personal funds should they wish to do that. In India, there are only two people who are in the I think it's the Forbes has a list of a global donors list, and it's Azim Premji and Jamshedji Tata are the only people who have appeared in that century. And we have the opportunity of giving much more. I don't think we've ignored philanthropy, but I think there's an opportunity to refocus on combining the two factors, which is what Preeyam was trying to suggest. I look forward to this conversation and apologize for being on mute for part of the time. Thank you.
Well, I think that raises this interest, as you mentioned, philanthropy versus CSR. And the question, I think, for many of us would be, does that really matter? Does the difference really matter in the end? Perhaps a legal requirement of CSR will result in a genuine sense of philanthropy. That, as Sundar was mentioning, didn't exist for a lot of companies earlier. And I sort of hypothetically said, what would happen if they actually lifted the law? But Sundar, why don't I turn to you again and give some further thoughts about this issue?
So let me pick up on what Sushil was talking about, philanthropy versus CSR, right? Firstly, as far as CSR is concerned today, it's, to my mind, at least the large companies, or at least the reputed, noted companies, know the benefit of giving back to society. It's not, I mean, while the requirement may be mandatory, but every organization worth its salt has been doing CSR for far longer than the law actually said it was supposed to be done, though the quantum may have been lesser or more depending on the individual organization. Secondly, the world, as we know, is changing. There's much more what I call responsibility that corporates need. So there's greater focus on the triple bottom line, on ESG, on various aspects, and companies have realized that customers or people or suppliers, whoever they like to work with good companies. Like I remember my boss once telling me that that people when I go and meet a customer, he says, "I'd like to work with you because you're a good person," and so this, while yes, I mean maybe the government needed to make this law and get people to sort of actually start thinking about this, because till then maybe it was because it was not mandatory. It's okay, fine, something we can do if we want to, but then now that, so there's some serious thought, and the board is involved. Boards are involved in most of the organizations, is involved behind CSR. And there's a board committee for all. I think all listed companies have to have a board committee for CSR, right? So with that in view, I think it's a great thing that there is this, and anybody, I really don't see what I call a conflict, as you mentioned, between philanthropy and CSR. Philanthropy can only do a certain amount, and CSR can obviously do much more, is much more focused in that sense. One last point I'd like to make, Pramit, in this one is that ultimately, and this is again something, it was boss once told me, was being Shivnadar, said that the government is the largest philanthropist. In any country, is the government which has to do, at the end of the day, any private organization or philanthropic person can do a certain amount, but at the end of the day, it's the government which has to take the, what I call, country forward. So what can a philanthropist or a CSR activity actually do? They can create what we call source codes, or proof points, saying, okay, so and so activity, this village, I want to do something so and so village. I did this, and this works. Maybe this can be replicated in other places, maybe through other organizations or through government or whatever. But the point is that that's the role that ultimately, to my mind, it's like a nice balance between personal individuals who are doing for their own benefit and hopefully benefiting of CSR. CSR as a more organized force, because it comes with certain, as I mentioned, need for measurement, so to speak, and find the government to so hopefully take this and bring this together as good examples and how that can be replicated further. So I think this is the best way it should go. I mean, that's my view. Thank you.
So Preeyam, would you like to chip in as well with your thoughts about any of the points that we've been discussing so far?
Yeah, sure. So I feel that the why of philanthropy, it's shifted from the socially conditioned obligatory done that we used to do in the olden days because of image and status building, or maybe for a feel good factor, or maybe even for religious reasons, perpetuated by priests injecting fear into our minds to do voluntary responsibility, and that is now evolved into more like self-actualization. And earlier the words that were used were contribution, donation, charity, sponsorship, because it was essentially only financial. But in the modern marketplace, philanthropy is fundamental to business growth, And it's not a cost of doing business. It's rather an investment in the community and the brand. And I feel that when you legally mandate CSR, what happens is that something which, as I said in my previous example, that, is something which I could have done at my personal level, the moment it's legally mandated, it just, the whole effect amplifies. The tangible, the intangible impact, it becomes more scalable, it becomes sustainable, there's a structure to it. So I'm totally for the view that, this legally mandated CSR of 2%, it's something which encourages organizations to create that culture amongst all its employees, amongst its stakeholders, to go and do their bit of CSR. And I'd just like to, share sort of my examples in this sphere, besides the Patton projects that we do, which actually comes under Patton Foundation. So mostly I followed the social entrepreneurship model because I feel it's a scalable, self-sustainable, easily applicable model. And it's an excellent way for organizations interested in hands-on philanthropy to make a grassroots level impact, and also for value creations from scratch. Just to cite some examples from some of my CSR initiatives, which actually align with our core business values. It's built on the foundations of empowerment or Atmanirbharta and Health 360. And these projects have a personal connection. My younger sister Prachi is a special needs child with ADHD, low IQ and bipolar disorder. And she really is the inspiration behind the drive to leave a legacy of lasting impact. My mom and I, our first foray into CSR was Caring Minds, which is an institute of mental health. This is a one-stop, affordable, easily accessible 360 mental health care solution for one and all across the globe. Next for us came I Can Fly, which is an institute for special needs individuals, which provides academic and vocational training to the intellectually challenged individuals. And our latest project, which is about 4 years old, which I'm really happy to share actually, is Cafe I Can Fly. And this is a cafe which is run by special needs students of I Can Fly. And this is a venture which I co-founded with my mom. It's an inclusive sheltered workplace, and it serves as a 24/7 awareness tool to break the stigmas and bash the taboos surrounding the capabilities of intellectually challenged individuals. So I feel that all of these initiatives, which are part of Patton Foundation, along with my foray into Water on Wheels, which comes under our sustainability vertical called Embracing Green, coupled with some of the rainwater harvesting projects which I've done across multiple states in India, we've always kept in mind to adopt we've adopted 10 of the 16 global UN SDGs across all our projects to make sure that every drop counts. And we began with one vision, but collectively we've been able to touch over 30 lakh lives over the last 8 years. And that is the part of CSR. And lastly, to end, I just say that we are on the verge of creating a global legacy of giving that holistically meets the people, planet, and profit challenge. We are at the precipice of a defining moment. And being a part of this discussion, it's been absolutely amazing with such notable panelists, and it's been an amazing experience for me. And yeah, these are my views on legally mandating CSR versus individual philanthropy.
Excellent. Thank you, Preeyam. Lots of, as you continue to give perfect examples of on-the-ground micro-philanthropy, which affects, as you said, in this case, 3 million people. Plus, it means now when I go to my home city of Calcutta, which you happen to share, I have another cafe to visit. So, Sushil, I turn to you.
I'm going to give a different view on philanthropy in that sense. I think that one of the activities that takes a lot of my time is to actually help organizations with my business experience, which dates back over decades, to think about how to get funds in for what they're trying to achieve in things like healthcare. I'm, for example, was on the council of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which is a world-leading body in healthcare and infectious diseases. We're now on the court there, which has been restructured to be a fundraiser. And it's interesting where you can use business experience to talk about the benefits of subscribing to projects in that area. The school has an annual budget of about £200 million a year. and no endowment, and that's a sort of crazy situation. We're also involved with the CSMVS. I always call it the Prince of Wales Museum because that's what we donated to, but they changed its name for various political reasons, which there's no merit in discussing on this panel. But we supported their efforts in renovating the museum in terms of the East Wing, which was basically a water-logged area, and a museum needs to have a dry area for anything. And so I'm now involved in a centenary program to create an endowment for the CSMVS in Bombay. And again, one is giving time to encourage others to also to give. We've given, but the objective we have is to get others to give much more. And there was an earlier session today with, I think one of the best sessions was with Abhishek Podar, who's founded a new museum in Bangalore, with Kiran Mazumdar, Firoza Godrej, and with Sunil, the Hero Company vice chairman. I mean, basically, there's the ability to give time and give experience, I think, is worth its weight in gold, where you can actually persuade people to think differently. And a much smaller example, I was involved with the Swiss Foundation, which was supporting a charity in Benares, right near the Ganga. And they had been given money to build a fish pond by some group in Holland. And here I am visiting the site, seeing a huge fish pond right next to the Ganga. And I said, what is this pond for? Oh, for fresh fish for the kids. It's a children's organization for people with handicap. I said, but there's fish in the river. Why do you need, well, we've got money for that. And it gets back to the point that Sundar made on governance. That was a clear demonstration of a lack of governance by the people running that particular charity. And I think that people like Gates have done a fantastic job in demanding governance, not in terms of added overhead, but in terms of making sure that you ask for money that you need and demonstrate that you've used it for that purpose, and that you then get compliance as a result of having systematic governance in place. I think that's an important role, both for philanthropy as such and for CSR as well, so that you have accountability. It was another institution where I was asked to give money, and it was a government-linked association, and I said I would happily donate if there was full accountability, and I never heard from them again. I was not surprised because the last thing they wanted was accountability. And these are issues that are causes of concern to me. And I think that with the development of the legal basis of CSR, you have an improved governance factor across the board. Another example is we have ancient family trusts. Some of them were founded 150 odd years ago. One of them, we're Jains, and one of them was to feed Jains. When I got involved with the family business, which was not that, 25, 30 years ago, I said, why are we feeding people who can perfectly well feed themselves once a year with a slap-up meal? The trust deed does not specify feeding rich Jains who can afford food. So we've restructured the way we handle that by saying we need to look at people, especially those who are not able to tell people they need help. We have people who will tell us that XYZ needs help. We don't want our name associated with that. But we make sure that they get not money, they get trained for twice a year from a good source, so there's no stone in there. They get value for money, and the appreciation that you get from activities like that, which are very micro level, very focused, using networks in a rational way, add personal satisfaction, but also add value to the community, maybe in a focused way, but at least these are all steps towards getting value for money from generations of having made money. Let me stop there.
Pramit, can I comment one point of Sushil? Yes. Thank you. So I think Sushil made a point about how he had talked to an NGO and told them come back. I want as to how you're accountable or whatever, and they didn't come back. Now there are two. It's not necessarily the fact that they didn't want to come back. What we have noticed is, and HCL Foundation, the CSR arm, works with more than 400 what I call NGOs, top NGOs, and I'm talking about top NGOs. Many of them do not know how to come back. They have thus far, many of time, haven't been looking at this in this lens. There's a group of young people or young, old, whatever people who are motivated, who are passionate, who want to do something, and they just go ahead and do it, right? But then it's only later they start thinking, oh, I need more funds. How does that happen? Or I need to be accountable. How does that happen? So at times, I'm just saying the reason the person did not come back to you may not have been the fact that they did not want to come back to you, they did not know how. So that's another thing which CSR and let's say large organizations can do to sort of help this ecosystem.
May I respond to that comment, Sundar, because it's very interesting that you say that, because in this particular instance with the fish pond that I talked about, the people knew perfectly well that they didn't need to dig a hole and fill it with water next to the Ganga. So they knew how to get back to us because they were trying to avoid criticism. They're not very happy when I visited there, to be honest with you. But to give you an example of people who then need money, I mean, I'm involved with the Singalan University. There's a thing called the Singalan Symposium. And there's a contingent of Indian students who write essays, usually at the last minute, but they have a total of about 200 students who get paid to come for free for a week to Switzerland at the symposium. And there's been a change, and I organize for the 20-odd Indian students and maybe 10 business people who attend this. It's about 1,000 people, the same level of participation as the World Economic Forum, but much less stultified. Much more interesting and much more relevant to my mind. But still, there's usually a round table with, say, 20 or 30 people linked with India. And the students there have, over the years, instead of wanting a job in government or wanting to become a slave in an investment bank as a young startup, or they've then migrated to being looking at multinational companies. And then the next stage was, we want to start our own business. And the last lot have actually wanted to do something to give back those who helped them get educated. There's one guy who was fed up with the corporate world and was working somewhere and had a laptop in a small town somewhere. And he realized that kids were looking at the tea shop across his shoulder. And one day one of them said, "Can I borrow your laptop?" So he was not very happy about that. So they said, "Well, can we borrow your phone?" So he let them borrow his phone, and he realized that they were actually autodidacts. They were teaching themselves how to use these things. And then it developed into an area where he developed things called nooks, where he had a little space that he rented where people could come and experiment and play and build things, repair things. A sort of circular economy argument in part. But it was just a way that he was able to stimulate interest. And then the next generation started coming, the grandparents started coming into these nooks. And so that's the sort of thing that we've been very helpful to support. But we've been very clear that when we help him, he has to tell us what he wants the money for, how he's going to use it. He's a business graduate, so it's easy for him to do. But he then infects this concept with other people who are creating nooks on his model. So I think there's a learning curve there, and I think it's one that works, to my mind. But you're right that people don't have a clue, but we have to then teach them.
I think one of the things that we're seeing in modern philanthropy in India is the fact that there are now so many layers of what's happening. I've been across the table from some of the biggest philanthropists in Silicon Valley, California, discussing what they would like to do, or what could they do in India regarding climate, which is now, of course, a huge issue. But for them, it's more about very policy-oriented things. How do we influence government? Because there's ultimately a limit to what you can do on the ground. It's really about a much larger game on the energy sphere and so on, but there's still philanthropies. But they know they're entering a political minefield when they go in there. And in fact, one of them got banned afterwards, and I had to help them get themselves unbanned. It took 3 years. But the point is that you have that level, and now you have something like Keto or Change.org working at your cell phone, beaming you and asking you for 20 rupees and a signature. And it's based on an enormous degree of micro mobilization, if you wish. And then, of course, you have layers and layers in between. And I could see that a lot of people get confused. If you're used to giving to a temple, or a masjid, or giving to members of your own family, where you have a pretty clear idea at a personal basis about the integrity and of that organization or the people involved, and where that money is, what that money is going to be used. And now you have these systems which are much, much further away from you. And let alone if you're a government official who's supposed to be monitoring all of this and saying, wow, we have the world's, I think India still has the world's largest NGO network, many of whom barely function in terms of they don't audit, they don't do anything. They fill out that Society Act form, which is one page, written in Victorian England, and then they give that, and then they do whatever they feel like. That it's incredibly difficult. Modern philanthropy in India will work on a huge number of levels. And it strains both individuals, corporations, and the government. So we still have a few minutes left. Would anybody like to comment? Preeyam, would you like to say something about what you see as where philanthropy in India could be going, or anybody else jump in?
Yeah, I just feel that, say someone, the way my grandfather or like someone in their generation, or like the way my father would do philanthropy, individual philanthropy, versus the way, say someone like me or in my generation would do it, it's a bit different, because maybe like, say someone like my grandfather who's built schools and hospitals in Rajasthan, and in Delhi and in Calcutta and all of that. So it's more of a one-off intervention, because say he's earned his money, he has some wealth, and then he feels that, okay, what do we do with this money for his own goodwill, and it makes him feel good. It's a feel good factor to do something for the community. So it's a one-off intervention, whereas there are no KPIs, there are no metrics as such. It's just like giving that money off for the greater good. Whereas people in my generation, when I talk to people sort of in the 25 to maybe 45, I see when we think of doing CSR, we would like it to be more hands-on, as in it's not a one-off intervention. It's more of really being involved in terms of not just money, but time, energy, and then the two-way accountability, and really knowing where the money is going, and then having tangible metrics for that, and then seeing change happening over time and making a scalable impact. That's how I feel is the difference between how philanthropy used to happen earlier versus now. And another interesting point I'd like to make is also, in the olden days in India, and I think it even happens now, when somebody in the family passes away, or you move into a new house, there are like priests who come in, and then they sort of inject this in your mind that due to religious reasons you should do philanthropy, or you should do that. You should give a certain amount of money, or you should give away these materialistic things, because this will sort of make you lead a better quality of life, or things like that. So I just feel that this is how it used to be earlier, but as everyone's becoming more conscious and more aware, these things are going away, and now it's about doing what you want with your own money. It's freedom of choice for everyone.
Well, we've come to the end of the session, but I think what Preeyam, you point out is really that the issue remains that whether you are doing it in the original temple or you're doing it in a modern corporate situation, you still want to have trust in what's going on here. That remains universal. Well, thank you all of you for this joining us in this panel discussion, and hopefully we'll meet again. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments, and look forward to keeping in touch in some manner.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.